Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Word of the Day for Wednesday, March 20th. I'm your host, Rene Holaday, and let's see what the Word has in store for us today. And the random turning comes to us from 2 Samuel chapter 4 that reads under the title, Ishbosheth is Murdered. And when Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. Now Saul's son had two men who were captains of troops. The name of one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab, the sons of Rimmon and Beerothite of the children of Benjamin, for Beeroth was also part of Benjamin. Because the Beerothites fled to Gittaim and have been sojourners there until this day. Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened, as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame. So his name was Mephibosheth. Then the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, set out and came at about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at noon. And they came there all the way into the house as though to get wheat. And they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped. For when they came into the house, he was lying on his bed in his bedroom. Then they struck him and killed him, beheaded him and took his head, and were all night escaping through the plain. And they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and said to the king, Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. And the Lord has avenged my lord the king this day of Saul and his descendants. Then David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Rimmon and Beerothite, and said to them, As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity, when someone told me, saying, Look, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag, the one who thought I would give him a reward for his news. How much more when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house on his bed? Therefore, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth? So David commanded his young men, and they executed them, cut off their hands and feet, and hanged them by the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner in Hebron. Well, that's it. Now, that's quite the interesting story because I don't know if all of you remember hearing about Mephibosheth before, but Mephibosheth was just 5 years old when both Saul and Jonathan were killed. And Jonathan is Mephibosheth's father. And so um, it, it's interesting here that Mephibosheth has more or less been uh, taken care of and given favor, and because he was lame in his feet and because he lost his father when he was just 5 years old, he had always been taken care of. And so in Second Samuel chapter 9, David is actually looking for someone to show kindness to from Saul's house. And it says here that Uh, now David said, Is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? And and so they describe, well, yeah, Mephibosheth is still here. And so uh, when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, Mephibosheth? And he answered, Here is your servant. So David said to him, Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. Then he bowed himself and said, "What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I?" Well, and so as you all know, Jonathan and David were very good friends, and so of course he's going to honor Jonathan's son. And it right here in the notes on this part of the passage, it says that David sees himself as acting on behalf of God in his graciousness to Mephibosheth. He illustrates the kindness of God. When Mephibosheth was 5 years old, he and his nurse were fleeing for their lives after the death of Saul and Jonathan at the battle of Jezreel, and Mephibosheth had fallen and become lame in his feet. And so the response from Mephibosheth was very humble. He said, described himself a dead dog, and dead dog represented a person of no value, obviously. And Mephibosheth likely had never heard of David's friendship with Jonathan, in that he was only 5 years old when his father died. And so, well, that's a little bit of the backstory to that. But wow, you kind of think that's pretty rough treatment when somebody was actually doing something they thought would be honoring to King David, and something that they thought that he would appreciate. And so you can imagine their surprise when, well, he has them killed, and not just killed, but brutally killed. And so this harkens back to when we were studying in Numbers chapter 35 about when somebody murders somebody else, that the only atonement that there is for the land is the murderer's blood himself. And so, like it describes here in 35:33, it says, "And no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it." Well, that's we just covered that last week. And one more verse here from Genesis chapter 9, verse 5, that this is something that probably not a lot of us are going to recall the details for, but this is another reference to taking almost like vengeance. Vengeance is not ours, it is the Lord's. But this is a very interesting example that God gives. It says, "Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. For the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man." And so murder is clearly a very big deal to the Lord. As we know, it's one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not murder. But it's interesting in regard to God's perception of the blood, that whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. And so, well, that also goes back to Cain and Abel, where God said to Cain, after he slew Abel, he said Abel's blood cries out to me from the ground. And so, well, that is also part of paying for blood, paying for the shedding of blood with blood. And one last thing, uh, in Psalm 9:12, it says, "When God avenges blood, he remembers them. He does not forget the cry of the humble." And so, well, interesting here too, in the notes for chapter 4 in 2 Samuel, it says here that, in case you're wondering, who is Ishbosheth, right? We know who Mephibosheth is. These names, boy, I'll tell you. But who's Ishbosheth, right? So Saul's other son was Ishbosheth. I'll say that 10 times real fast. Well, and so we've got Jonathan and Ishbosheth, was the one who was brutally murdered, had his head cut off. and brought to David. And so yeah, so David, just like it says here, how much more when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house on his bed? Therefore, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth? And so David commanded his young men, and they executed them, cut off their hands and feet, and hanged them by the pool in Hebron. Wow. Well, so it says here in the notes, it says that David views their act as a violent murder against a defenseless man, therefore warranting execution. And these radical measures send the message to the northern tribes that David holds no hatred for Saul, his tribe, or his descendants. And so, again, interesting that David David always respected Saul because he said that God was the one that chose Saul. And so why wouldn't he honor Saul? And so he kept true to that, even down to the last where he took Saul's grandson Mephibosheth and said that he could eat bread at his table for the rest of his life, and he gave him and his family land that they could all harvest and farm. And so David kept his word and honored not just Saul but his entire family, even though Saul hated him. Was insanely jealous of David and was trying to kill him all the time. And so, well, David had, no ill will back towards him because he honored God above David honored God way farther above Saul, and if God picked Saul, then he honored Saul. And so it was David's love and respect and honor for the Lord and what the Lord wanted that is actually the origin of David's affection and honoring of Saul. And so, well, that does it for the Word of the Day study, and I hope you all had a few more things added to your belt that you now know. And well, I hope you will all join me again tomorrow morning to see what the Lord has in store for us for Thursday. All right, you all have a wonderful and blessed day.